it's important for us to understand what a real pastor looks like. Paul gave some qualifications that must be met by every pastor. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, and I just want to read this, 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. It says, "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer or bishop," and as I showed you before, bishop and elder and pastor are all the same thing in the New Testament. "He desires a noble task." It's a good thing. "Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach." In other words, a man who's going to be an elder or a pastor, he must be above reproach. What is reproach? Reproach is speaking evil of somebody. If you're going to be an elder or a pastor in God's church, nobody should be able to say, "Hey, I saw Pastor so-and-so at the strip club last week." Or, "Hey, I saw Pastor so-and-so at the casino the other week." The pastor must be above reproach. That doesn't mean sinless. Nobody is sinless. But if you're going to lead God's people, you have to be an example of what it means to follow Christ. You shouldn't be able to point to the pastor and see nothing but bad examples. If you are in all kinds of debt and can't never get nothing done and your life is raggedy and falling apart, you have no business trying to pastor anybody. He says, "Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife." He shouldn't have a whole bunch of sweethearts. Sober-minded. Sober-minded. In other words, he's not extreme. He's not irrational. He doesn't lose his temper. He doesn't overindulge. He's not out of control. He's sober-minded. He's a sober-thinking person. His life says that he's a sober, rational person. He's not one way one day and another the next day, and you don't know which person is going to show up because he has a volatile temper, a volatile disposition. No, he is sober-minded, self-controlled. He doesn't get mad and cuss people out. He don't get mad and sock people in the face when he get mad or angry or upset. Self-controlled, respectable. In other words, the people on his job has respect for him. If you go to your elder or your pastor's job, and what would the people on his job say about him? "That's your pastor? I've been working with him for 20 years, and I never would have knew he was nobody's pastor." You sure that's your pastor? It says respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, always arguing and bickering with people. Oh boy, this disqualifies a lot of folks. Not a lover of money. Lord have mercy. But Paul says it right here. If you want to be an elder, you want to be a pastor, you want to be a bishop, you ought not to be a lover of money. Now this one going to disqualify some more folk here. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert. In the old King James, it says a novice. That means somebody that just got saved 3 weeks ago. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders. Who are outsiders? The unsaved people. What do unsaved people say about your pastor? What do your neighbors say about him? What kind of reputation does he have? So that he may not fall into disgrace into a snare of the devil. And so Paul is saying here, a pastor has to be approved by God for that position. That doesn't mean that Paul earned the right to be a pastor. He was called by grace. God appoints men by grace. But those whom God appoints to these offices, God also gives them these qualities. And any man living less than this has no business being a pastor or an elder in God's church. And so Paul says, I wasn't trying to please any human being because I was approved by God. God approved me to be a pastor. And then look what else he says in verse 4. Just as we have been approved by God, look at this, to be entrusted with the gospel. Notice that word. We were entrusted with this. A pastor or an elder, a bishop, is somebody whom God has entrusted something to. Have you ever entrusted something valuable to somebody? And what is more valuable to God than his church? The church belongs to God. It is the bride of Christ. And the gospel is God's message. It is the message by which he builds up his church. God is not going to give that to just anybody. If you had something valuable and precious, would you give it to somebody that's unreliable? Would you give something precious and valuable to somebody who can't pay their bills, somebody who never is on time, always late every time, you can't never count on them? So-and-so said they was going to be here 2 hours ago. No, you wouldn't entrust somebody like that with something precious.